Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for this session called Intuit ProConnect Tax, The Fundamentals. So glad that you could join us today. This session will be, in case you couldn't guess it, about the fundamentals of ProConnect Tax. And I should mention that while we'll be probably spending more time in an individual 1040 return today as we learn some of the fundamental ways the program is organized and laid out, this session is intended to be used across the different tax return types you may be working in. And so I'll mention this again throughout the presentation today as we're looking at things inside of ProConnect and talking about how ProConnect is laid out and the way ProConnect is designed to do tax return preparation. But that's the key thing to mention here is that the material here, again, may be focusing on the 1040 tax type as far as the visuals, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about is more broadly applicable than that. If you're in this session today, this may be where you're coming to learn more about ProConnect Tax if you're considering using it, or maybe you are a brand new user to ProConnect Tax and you're learning the fundamentals so that you can more effectively use the program, or perhaps you've used ProConnect Tax in the past and you want to reinforce some of those fundamental program concepts around how ProConnect Tax ticks. Let me introduce myself here very quickly. My name is Ross Olson. I am a senior solution specialist here at Intuit. Our agenda that you see on screen is what we'll be covering today, and we really do have a jam-packed session for about the hour that we have scheduled. We're going to begin talking about how to create returns, how to get started in the program, how to create returns, how to create clients, and also the general overview of the tax return program itself when you're doing the work, when you're preparing tax returns in the program. So we'll talk about how it is set up, how it's laid out, some of the different places you'll want to be aware of as you're using the program and preparing tax returns. We'll also talk about some utilities that are going to be helpful as you are utilizing ProConnect Tax and where to go to find some help. So as you're using the program, undoubtedly there will be a time where you'll need a little bit of some extra assistance. Maybe you'll pull this webinar, this session back up, or you can use some of these other resources that I will mention as we talk about where to find some help. Before we jump too far into content though, let's do some housekeeping. So chat, the first option I'll call your attention to, that will let you speak with anyone here in the session today, and you can also use it if you need to talk to me or any of my team behind the scenes. And Q&A you'll also see as available. That's if you want to reach out to us directly behind the scenes to ask a question that's maybe not directed at everyone else that's here. Utilize both of those to communicate throughout the session today. This session will also have polling questions. So I will make sure to call those out. You'll see a polling tab appear when they're launched. So you shouldn't see a polling tab right now. But when the poll is launched, you'll see it pop up between the chat and the docs tab. And when you answer that question, just click on it. It will change color. That's how you know you've answered the polling question. There's no submit button or lock in your answer. Just click on an option. It'll change color and you'll be all set. You also find presentation material in the Docs tab. That is where you can get the presentation slides and other resources that are applicable for this session today. There is a lot in the slides and the presentation slides that we are going to be going through. I'll go through them probably a little bit more quickly than you'll be able to memorize them. So that resource will be helpful as you are wanting to refresh or follow along. This session will also be available recorded right after it concludes. You'll use the same link. There will be a survey that will pop up at the tail end. We always appreciate those surveys. It lets us know what we're doing well, what we're not doing so well, so that we can improve the next time we present sessions to you. This session is eligible for 1 hour of CPE and CE credits. You need to make sure you're here, of course, to get that credit. So you need to be here for that minimum amount of time and answer polling questions. throughout. If you meet those requirements, you'll be sent an email to the email that you used to register with. It should be there within about 48 hours. If you don't see it, check your junk or spam folder. And if you have any questions about CP or CE, like your certificate didn't arrive, you can reach out to us at protax_training@intuit.com. Make sure to include the title and the date so that we know which webinar you attended and which webinar you have questions about. A quick disclaimer. There is not a whole lot that could be construed as tax advice here, but the main thing to take away from this slide is that what I'm about to present on is taken from a snapshot in time, and so things can change quickly in our industry. Our first polling question, right off the bat, just to keep you on your toes, what is your primary reason for attending this webinar? To earn free CPE/CE, to explore new solutions, to solve a specific problem, general interest or education, or other? Take about 1 minute to answer this question and we'll move on. While you are answering this question, as a reminder, if you're wanting to send me a question, use the Q&A as your primary stop. You can use chat. I'll be checking it periodically during these polls, or my team behind the scenes will be checking it as well. I like to try to multitask, but it doesn't always happen as well as we'd like. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation today. If ever you have any hiccups, minor little blips or anything, try refreshing your browser. That's always a good way to just reset things to see if things will go back to how they are intended to be. Perfect. Take a few more seconds to answer this question. We're going to wrap things up here in about 10 seconds. Okay, we'll conclude this in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. We'll take a quick look at the answers here. Thank you so much for answering this question, and we'll move right along to our first stop, which is creating a client. And getting started within the program itself. So creating a client can be done one of 3 ways. You can add them directly. You can have them shared or created in QuickBooks Online Accountant, or you can bring clients in through data conversions. Probably the easiest or most direct way is to add them. You can add them from the clients list. There's an add client button you can click on. Make sure you choose the correct client type, as it cannot be changed later. You'll want to choose between the individual and the business type. Individuals categorized by 1040 and the 709. All other return types, 1065s, 1120s, those would be a business type for the client. There is a synced client list with QuickBooks Online Accountant, so any clients appearing in ProConnect will also appear in QuickBooks Online Accountant. If you accept an invitation from a company as their accounting firm to work with them as their accountant for a QBO or QuickBooks Online company, they'll appear as a client in both QBOA and ProConnect Tax. Or if you just add a client from QuickBooks Online with or without a subscription, they'll also appear. Again, the client list is synced across both, and so if you create a client in one, you'll have that same client in both locations. You can also create clients through data conversions, which is really bringing a tax return, but the tax return has to be connected to a client. And so this process will essentially do both. It'll create a client, but it'll segue nicely into our next topic of creating a tax return. So data conversion allows you to take data from another supported tax software and bring it into ProConnect Tax. Firms that are new to ProConnect Tax can utilize it, or if you've acquired a firm, or if somehow your client has access to their saved data from another tax preparer and they are able to provide that to you. This is not the same as having a PDF or a printed copy or a scanned copy of the return. This is the return as it is saved in the other tax program. And it does have to be backed up a specific way. More on that in just a moment. It is an automated process and is repeatable, so you can do it more than once. It's not just a one-time process and that's all you get. You can submit as many times as needed. And it is available from the time the program releases until approximately October of each year. There is a small window where conversion isn't available while the years are being switched over. And the way this process works is it takes prior year tax return data and converts it into starting point current year data. So we're not going to have a one-to-one recreation of a return. This is more like a transfer or a pro forma just from a different software into ProConnect Tax. And the reason why, again, we have that changeover in October is you're only able to take the most recent prior year and bring it into the current tax year inside of ProConnect Tax. So we're not going to be able to go back 5-10 years and bring that data in, only the most recent prior year. And through this process, it'll create a new client. Or if you have existing clients, it'll find that information and match it up to that client using their SSN, EIN, or even looking for names and information about that client that has been entered for the client inside of the program. It is a 3-step process, and I should mention too, these are hyperlinks that you can see on the presentation slides in front of you. So I recommend, again, downloading that presentation handout so you can have these after the fact. There'll be more links in there, but also because we're going through it fairly quickly, and this will be a good reference for you to have in your pocket should you ever need it. But conversion is a 3-step process. It's going to allow you to or it's going to request that you back up that current data, again, from the other tax program, upload it to ProConnect, and then you'll get an email once that conversion is processed, and you can begin working. The process is completely automated, extremely accurate, and 100% guaranteed. So you know that there's not someone working behind the scenes to move the data and dot the I's, cross the T's. It is something that's being done automatically, and the data that's being converted will be accurate, and we guarantee it. You're able to reach out, and we'll work through any conversion questions you may have if something doesn't quite look right. That also, again, creates a return. So starting a return in ProConnect Tax, you can also approach this from a few different angles. You can go to the tax return tab, and you'll see several returns listed if you've already been working on them or already created them. They're displayed by year inside of the tax return tab. You can create a tax return by clicking on the Create Tax Return button. You can then choose an existing client, or you can add a new client. And I'll also show you in just a moment that if you do have those PDF copies of returns for your 1040 clients, you can create a brand new return and client from that 1040 copy of the return also. But we'll take a look at that in just a moment. You also select the return type, and you can choose to transfer data. If you prepared that client in the prior year, you can pro forma or transfer their data forward when you're starting their return this year. And you can do that in batch also. So if you want to just bring all the data from last year over into the current year, you can do that, and then you would just select that return instead of having to create a new return and choosing to transfer the data at that point. You can also start a return from the Clients tab. This is going to list all of your clients out. You can navigate to that client, open their profile, and create a tax return from there. That way you won't have to select that client. You'll be able to just immediately start working in that return for that client. You can also create returns through Prep for Taxes. This is the process that allows you to bring data from QuickBooks Online Accountant into ProConnect Tax. So you have to utilize this, or you have to have a QuickBooks Online client or a QuickBooks Ledger client to bring this data over. It will let you map data from their books into ProConnect Tax, and you can create a brand new return using this process or update an existing return. So this is one additional way to create that return, but you can update it, so you can do this more than once. Just remember that if you update the return, it's going to overwrite the mapped fields. It's not going to add to it or take away from it. You also do have the option inside of ProConnect to manually adjust or make tax-only adjustments that aren't going to affect your client's books either. So let's take a look inside of ProConnect Tax so that we can see a little bit more about what it looks like, and you can get more hands-on again with this process so you know where everything is. Perfect. So we are inside ProConnect Tax now. We're going to go through some of those things I mentioned earlier. So first and foremost, here's your client list, your tax return tab. You can hold down the control key and scroll in and out. I'm in Chrome. Other browsers may be slightly different, but you'll notice that zoom option, because ProConnect is browser based, you can decide if you need things to be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller as needed. I'll probably zoom in a little tighter so that everyone can see what I'm clicking on and what I'm doing, but you have the option again to customize that. So as I mentioned, your returns are going to be listed out on this screen in the tax return tab, sorted by year. So you'll be able to navigate to the tax return year that you want to work on, and you'll see your clients listed here. And you can simply start a return by clicking on that client's name. You can also create a tax return. This is where you can choose from your existing clients or add a brand new client. If you add a new client, you'll see the client types, and we list out the client types that are associated with a business or individual, so you don't have to remember that. And here's the option where you can bring in a PDF copy for the 1040s to create a brand new starting point return with that PDF. Again, this is not a conversion. This is just using the PDF copy to get a starting point for this client. So that's one way to add a client and start a return. Again, you can select an existing client here as well. And as I mentioned, if they have that prior year data, you can transfer that information into this new return as you're starting it here. The other option where you can go to see clients and also start returns is the clients tab. This will list all of your clients out. You can simply open their profile. This will show all of their tax returns by year across all the types that you've created for them. You can also use this to create a new tax return for this client if you need to. The final option to mention here about starting clients, as I had talked about, is converting data. In the settings, this is where you can find the convert data option. This will walk you through that conversion process, have you install the conversion wizard, which will hold your hand in backing up and submitting that data for conversions. I encourage you that if you are planning on converting data or would like to learn more, review those links in the handout or go to this section for convert data, because it will list out the details about conversions so you can see how they work. Okay, let's jump back into our presentation slides, and we'll keep the session moving. So let's do this. Oh, our next polling question. The question is, the client must have a QuickBooks Online subscription for your firm to utilize Prep for Taxes and QBOA. Take about 1 minute to answer this question. I'll look at any questions you maybe have asked me and give you again some time to answer this. If you stepped away, come back, answer the polling question. And it's, the client must have a QuickBooks Online subscription for your firm to utilize Prep for Taxes and QuickBooks Online Accountant. Let's go ahead and wrap this up in 3, 2, and 1. We'll take a look at the results. If you want to utilize Prep for Taxes and QuickBooks Online Accountant, those clients have to have a QuickBooks Online subscription. Ledger is a type of QuickBooks Online subscription, so either a QBO subscription or QuickBooks Ledger is part of QBO, so this would be true. Again, no wrong answers here necessarily, just make sure that you answer the question and understand that you have to have some type of subscription in QuickBooks Online in order to utilize that Prep for Taxes. Perfect. We'll move on then to the Profile tab. So now we're going to go inside of the return. So we have looked at how to start a client across any tax type, so not just 1040, how to create a return, and that's really the basics, getting things started. Either you can do that from scratch or have information converted or have that client listed or created inside of QuickBooks Online Accountant. Either way, you need that basic information to get going inside of the program. And so our next stop then is reviewing what is inside this Profile tab. And the way I describe the Profile tab is that it's kind of a foundation. And that's what I've subtitled this, the Returns Foundation. This is where, when you start a return for the first time, it'll be the initial screen that you navigate to. After the first time, though, you won't be landed here anymore. You'll go to the next tab, which will be the Input Return tab. But at least initially, we want to start here. You can always go back if you need to make changes though. Be aware though, because it's the foundation, if you're making adjustments to the foundation, it can affect the rest of the return. It's where you're going to select states. Which states need to be prepared. All states that are supported are included, so you don't have to update or install new states. You can select it from the list, and you can remove any states if you've added them in the past and need to be removed. As a reminder though, if you have had or entered state-specific information, that will be removed when you remove the state. So be aware of that. You can also choose electronic filing options, which states are going to be electronically filed, and is there different tax types or different such things, different forms, different categories for e-file, like extensions or amended returns, estimated payments. You'll find all of that on the tab as well. If you don't check an option for e-file, that's just the traditional paper file method. So it'll generate the return, but in particular, this is going to sync up with some of the diagnostics later, so you want to make sure it's set up correctly. The input return tab is our next stop, and it's probably where you'll be spending most of the time in the return. Again, we'll be looking inside the 1040 return here in just a moment, but this is going to be true for any tax type. When you're navigating inside of the return, two main categories, the table of contents and the navigation panel. The table of contents is going to give you a bird's eye view of everything that ProConnect has included in that tax type. You can access it by clicking on the View All Input Screens button. You can make it your default view. So if you prefer this, you can definitely make this the all-time view in ProConnect. The way it's organized is based on broad categories, and then those categories have various input screens or sections that relate to it. And it's going to be organized by your workflow progression. So where you'll have, need to enter the client information and then maybe enter payments and extensions or estimated payment information. It'll then follow the flow of the tax return itself as far as things like income and credits and deductions, as well as miscellaneous categories also. Your selections or the sections of the input screens are widely going to be dependent on what tax type you're in, but they're all going to stay organized in that same style of organization. And if you're using an input screen, you'll immediately know that it's in use because it will be bold. The navigation panel works very similarly, but it's compacted. So it's not something that is a brand new way to organize it, but it's a new way to view those input screens. It'll match that organization from the table of contents view, but it's going to allow you to do a few different things that table of contents view didn't, which is search across all the various input screens, all the descriptions and labels, and the information you've entered into the return. You can also adjust the views to include every possible input screen and filter to just show the input screens and fields that you're using. You'll also have in the 1040 return type Smart Navigation, which is going to allow you to see what most preparers go to next. Where's the next stop for most preparers when they're preparing this 1040 return? Just a helpful reminder, but you can always toggle that on or off. Data entry is really the core process of the input return tab. You're entering the information, potentially reviewing information that has been imported, but this is where we're going to be doing potentially the bulk of the work, depending on, regardless of the return type. And what we'll be covering next will be how these input screens are organized. We'll talk a little bit about sourcing input. Where did this amount come from? Where do we want it to go to on the calculations? About overrides and adjustments, because those are important data entry elements that do affect how the return is calculated. We'll talk the data entry drawer, which we'll see inside the program, and briefly talk about how you can review the return while you're doing data entry as well. So we'll start first on the input screen organization. So there's a few types of screens that I've broken in or categorized them into inside of ProConnect. The first is simple screens. These are screens with information on them, data fields, but we just scroll top to bottom. There are detailed screens that have an upper level tab that break the screen into different sections. You'll still scroll to navigate, but you'll click on the tab that you want to be working in first. And there's also screens that have multiple activities. So, for example, multiple W-2s or multiple pass-through entities, K-1s. Those would have multiple tabs for each W-2, each K-1. And then you would also potentially see a quick entry grid for those multiple activities, which is going to be more of a spreadsheet style view that will let you enter them more than once. So you may have just a basic screen to enter information on, kind of like the client information screen. You may have a detailed screen, or you may have a detailed screen that has multiple activities on it, and we'll take a look at what those screens look like in just a moment. When you're sourcing your input into the program, this is telling the program, where is this amount coming from? It's going to allow for more precise data entry. For your simple returns you've set up with just, one state or maybe no states, you may not need to source anything. But especially when we're looking at multiple state returns included in one, or state and federal, where you want to make sure information isn't flowing to one or the other, sourcing information becomes important. And your calculations and the way that this will flow to the tax forms oftentimes is dependent on sourcing. You'll see columns inside of the program for federal amounts. And if you put an amount in that federal amount column, that will flow to the federal and resident state. Again, for your basic return, maybe just one state in the federal, you don't have to get too complicated with it. You may see a state if different column. This will be specifically for that resident state. So if something is different between the federal amount and the resident state amount, that's where we use a state if different. If there's no difference, just use the federal amount. And finally, there's a state source amount. This is where we need to put in information if you have part year or non-resident states and a multi-state return. That's where you can utilize this column. If that seems a little bit too much for you, you can pretty safely ignore the state if different and state source amount and utilize the federal column, but click on that plus icon. That will let you enter information, again, more in a spreadsheet view that you can put into this field or into a field and choose the applicable states as necessary, and also choose if you want those amounts to flow just to the state or just to the federal. And so you have a lot of power in deciding where amounts need to flow to. I should mention here that if you leave it blank, it's going to calculate things, as if this amount applies. It'll follow the appropriate state rules about, other state amounts, other state taxes, but you still may need to have an S or N to source it. Again, we'll cover this more. I'll show you what it looks like, so you don't have to take my word for it, but this will allow you to, again, enter information in a way that it's going to flow correctly if you have more of those complex data entry scenarios. And I keep saying, we say non-resident state here too. For your business tax types, just more than one state included, it's going to be important to correctly allocate those source fields for the correct state, because that will, again, affect calculations in the program. Another calculation or input that you may come across are overrides and adjustments. So overrides are fields labeled with an O or override, and they are going to ignore all calculations and use the entered amount or the data instead of a specific field or line on a form. Adjustments are the other option. They'll be labeled A or adjust. If you put an amount in an adjustment field, whatever you put in there will be added to the calculated amount. So a negative amount entered into an adjustment will effectively subtract from the calculated amount. A positive amount will add to it. So these will affect the calculations also. Generally, you'll want to avoid these as kind of the first, reflex or I want to put something in here because this will just make the amount correct on the return. You'll generally want to avoid it as a shortcut in that regard. But sometimes you do need to enter overrides and adjustments. They're not just in the program to force calculations or make changes. They are required sometimes, but generally there is a way to enter information into the program to get it to appear how you want and without having to use that override or adjustment. Another stop in the Input Return tab is the Data Entry drawer. This is where you'll find things like Intuit Link, which is the collaboration utility included with ProConnect Tax. So any returns or questions you've asked your client, or excuse me, any documents you've asked for, or any questions you've asked of your clients will appear in this tab for Link. You can flag items, so anything that's missing data or needs attention. You can insert comments, like firm notes regarding the tax return, and you can utilize data import to bring source documents into the 1040 return and again, automate some of that data entry. You'll also find input screen help, a little question mark on this data input drawer. And we'll be looking at some of this a little bit later in the session, but I wanted to mention that because it is part of the Input Return tab. Review Return is an option to be able to utilize another browser window for side-by-side data entry and forms view. So if you want that multi-monitor support, you can utilize it this way. It's going to give you an abbreviated version of the Check Return tab. You won't have the summary or diagnostics, but you'll still have all of the forms listed out there in a similar way that you would have in the Check Return tab. You can sort by forms that are in use while you're doing data entry, all possible forms, which you would, if it's federal, or which state forms you want to look at, and you can search through those forms as well. So you can see a list and scroll, but you can do a search. And the forms, many of the forms will have blue rectangular boxes on the form lines that will let you click on them to jump to where that input is located at in the other window that's open, and also provide summary information when applicable about how that field was calculated. Again, it'll open that in the relevant window or data entry screen that you're utilizing. So let's take a look at this process just to get an idea of what this looks like inside the program. So let me switch things over here and we'll jump right in. So we left off looking at clients and looking at their tax returns. I'm going to navigate to a client again. In the year that I've selected for the particular tax type, I'll open a return directly from here. And this will allow me to begin working on this client. Now, I mentioned that every subsequent time you enter the return, you're not going to be brought to the Profile tab. And because this wasn't a brand new client for me, I was brought to the Input Return tab. But you can always navigate back. And as I mentioned, you can add any state that is supported directly from this screen. You'll see them all listed out below. You can check the box for which of these states need to be electronically filed, or remove anything as needed also. You'll also find other tax types like extensions or amended returns, rather than just the general or main form filing here as well. So this is your foundation. You're setting things up, getting things ready to be not just electronically filed, but prepared and or electronically filed as needed. Every other time will be brought to the Input Return screen. And what you may prefer is to have the View All Input screens available by default. This is, again, that table of contents view that shows those broad categories, general, and then all the data input screens below it. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said it follows the flow of the return. We'll have the general information, but then we go to income, deductions, credits, taxes, other, and some of the miscellaneous forms that are supported also. If you would like this view to be the default, just toggle it on to be the default. And now every time that you open this client and go to the Input Return tab, this will be what you see first. And you can simply click the chevron or the arrow to expand out this more of this column-based navigation, the ability to jump in and see the same categories, but a little bit more condensed. So you'll see the exact same input screens here that you'll see in the table of contents, but you can keep this up side by side as you're doing data entry. So while you're entering client information, for example, you'll be able to see side by side where these other forms are at and where they're located. And you'll also see on this screen, as well as the table of contents, which data entry screens are in use. They'll be bolded. You can search through this particular return for keywords, section items, which are going to be the essentially the data input screens that are located again in this entire listing of table of contents. It'll also search at the same time for those field descriptions. Those are the actual labels for the fields, but it's also going to search through field data, which I don't have any data I've entered that has the word expense in it, but this is where you could search for numbers, EINs, SSNs, or amounts that you've entered into the return. You'll be able to use that search functionality there. You can also filter this to all are in use, and I particularly like this functionality because if you filter your data input screens and fields to in use, it takes away everything in the return except for the data input that you've already made. So as you're reviewing this information, as you're looking at data entry fields, this will take everything out that you're not using, and you can change back to all, and it will put those fields in that you haven't used in the past, and those data input entry screens that you haven't used, they'll be re-entered. But this is a way to remove all that static, all that extra information that you're not using. A fantastic way to do, more of the review process, but also just to find where you've entered something in the return. As I mentioned, the basic screens in ProConnect Tax, you'll have the simple screens that are simply scrolling top to bottom. You may also have more complex screens. So if I go to something like a K1 screen for pass-through income, I'll see various tabs across the top that will break this data input screen up into various categories. And I can click on these screens or these tabs to navigate through this data input screen or these data input screens for the activity that I'm utilizing. So I could have more than one activity or more than one K1 in this case. I can see them all. If I hit view all, I can also add one directly here by clicking the plus icon on the tab. If I enter the name of this S corporation, it will also automatically name that tab. So I can have that organization done automatically. I can also hit these three horizontal lines to get to more of a high-level view or a quick entry grid that will have all the information listed out at high level. I can download this as a CSV also and search through this list also if I have several to work with. You also see that on something like the wages screen, where we again have the tab based across the top, so I can see all the W-2s or add an additional one, and I can see in a quick entry grid high level information that I can enter directly. It's not just summary information. I can do data entry directly here, but I can also jump into that specific activity and do more work. So again, while we're looking at the W-2 screen here for a 1040, this is the general style of organization you'll find throughout the return when it comes to tab-based organization across the top of a data input screen that will break the screen into certain sections, as well as tabs if you have more than one activity for that particular data input screen. And while I'm here, I mentioned something else like sourcing information and how that would work in the program. Well, in particular, in something like a W-2, we have information entered and we can very quickly choose, which state this amount or these amounts belong to in a multi-state return. You'll also find on W-2s in certain places different amounts for, state if different or state information to be entered. Notice there's an immediate help icon here that's going to talk more about state if different and sourcing information into the return. One thing that you're going to be able to do, not just on a W-2, but throughout data input in ProConnect, is when you hover over a field, you'll see this plus icon. Let me go ahead and close out on my help menu here to the right. This plus icon will allow you to bring up, again, more of that spreadsheet style view that I can utilize to put more than one amount. So if I have something that's going to add directly to it, it lets me have this be a little bit delineated. But something else I can do is select which state this amount belongs to and source it to that state. And as I mentioned, to choose N or S, where something marked S will only flow to that state that's been selected in the state source column, and something marked N will not flow to any state as part of the return. Again, assuming that state allows that. Some states require that all federal amounts are reported to that state. But when you get into more complex scenarios of allocating income or allocating amounts, expanding that plus icon on a field is generally going to allow you to do more detailed data input and data entry within the return. Something I also mentioned was the data entry drawer. This is where you'll be able to see, again, the Intuit link information. If you sent your client an input Intuit link request, you'll see flagged items, comments, and the ability to import data as well. And I already showed you the ability to find help immediately within this screen also. You'll see them all listed here, but you'll also find them as you're doing data entry throughout the return also. Our final stop in the Input Return tab is being able to review that return, to see the forms as you're doing data entry. Now, I'm not able to show you information side by side. You'll just have to trust that I could drag this over into another window and see things side by side. Also notice that it'll let me know when more than one person is working in the return. In this case, it's me, it's myself. I'm working in the return also, and so that's why I'm getting this message that pops up. But that's a handy feature if more than one person is working in a return at one time. Let me expand this to full screen so you can see this document view or the forms view. This is where you'll be able to see all of the forms listed, again, broken up by tax or by state and by which forms are generating on the form as applicable, or all possible forms that could be generating for this return, which there are quite a few in the 1040 type. And you can also search across these forms for a description or a form number to find a form as needed. If you're looking at a form, I mentioned those blue fields that will let you jump to input. Clicking on those fields will let you see where the amounts are coming from, and you can click these links to jump into the data entry. Again, side by side, it would navigate to it behind the scenes here, but this will let you jump to where data entry is done. And if I close out of this data entry here and do something like the client name, for example, you'll see behind the scenes, it's brought me to the client information screen to do that data entry. When you're doing inputs or making inputs in the return, refreshing the forms will recalculate the information so you'll see the forms with their latest output. Perfect. Let's jump back then to our presentation slides, and we'll continue talking about the check return tab, which we already saw a little bit of. This is where you can review the return to see the summary information, the forms that we already looked at, diagnostics, and overrides and suggestions. So the tax summary are going to show you current and prior year amounts, so a good comparison tool or review tool. They're going to give you those immediate differences, again, sorted by federal and any states that are included. The forms, it's going to look very similar to what we just saw in the review return section, but it's going to be in that same window. It won't pop open in a new window. Diagnostics are going to be included here also. There's a few different types of diagnostics, which I'll list out on the screen now. You'll see that they're important. I would highly recommend reviewing those and not just ignoring them. Some you can't ignore. But this screen will also show those diagnostics, which you're going to be able to resolve them directly on that screen, but we'll look at that a little bit closer in just a moment. When you're resolving them, it's going to give you details about it. Again, let you make those changes directly, and you can refresh them to recalculate the return and see if those diagnostics have been cleared. There is an ignore checkbox. You can utilize that to ignore a diagnostic, but beware that if you do that, it may still result in a rejection. Just because it filed without that diagnostic doesn't mean it will be accepted by the appropriate agency. You'll also find a diagnostic reference number, which you can search across our help community, but you can also provide that to our customer success support team if you do need a little bit of some assistance in resolving that diagnostic. As I mentioned, there are overrides and adjustments in the program. If you use those, you're going to see them all listed, because oftentimes you're trying to figure out how did this amount get calculated. It's an override or adjustment that has been entered. So those are all listed as well. So a quick immediate cue that this has been entered if you're seeing numbers that don't quite make sense based on how everything else has been entered. You'll also find suggestions. These are kind of the heads up diagnostics, or I've called it the co-pilot to that final review. These will give you information that won't necessarily prevent filing, so the return will likely be accepted, but they're oftentimes going to help you identify tax savings, help avoid any mistakes or anything that's missing on the return that'll help produce amending returns later. You'll review it just like diagnostics, and you should consider all the suggestions as you would diagnostics, but some of them can be safely ignored if they don't apply. They're more of just, does this apply to you? If yes, you'll want to change it. If not, you can move on. The file return tab is the last tab in the program. This is where you can print an e-file. E-signature is also included here. So you'll see an e-file panel that will let you file across the different return types. And again, this is generated largely from that profile tab where you told the program what you're going to be electronically filing. It's also your final indicator for diagnostics, and you can uncheck even if you've checked e-file in the profile tab, you can check certain boxes or uncheck them if you're not ready to e-file a state or federal yet. And the e-file button is located here, and that lets you transmit the return. E-signature is included also. This will let you send those e-file authorization forms to your clients to be electronically signed. You can also send additional documents via PDF. You can include a copy of the tax return or any other documents for reference. You do need to utilize e-signature credits to send these envelopes. You only use one credit for taxpayer and spouse for up to 130 documents in that envelope for reference, or if they all need signatures by the taxpayer, the spouse, or the business representative. Intuit signature is not required, but it is integrated into this final workflow. But be aware that oftentimes if you're e-filing, states can vary. Federally, generally, you need to have that e-file authorization signed and completed. You don't need to use Intuit signature to do that, but it is integrated into this screen. And also you can print from this screen too. You print to PDF. All copies are generated as a PDF. You can then save, print, or share that PDF via Intuit link. Remember that collaboration hub. You have some options to mask and customize those print settings, to complete a complete return, to choose what letter you want to include there that you can further customize. You can also view or print those e-signature documents or those electronic filing authorization documents if you're going to have them signed, with wet ink, or share them outside of Intuit e-signature. You can also do a partial print. You can also do a partial print to PDF as well. And again, sometimes you just need to print to authorize that return. You don't need to use Intuit e-signature. This is where you can print those forms partially or choose the e-signature docs to do so. So let's take a look at that. So the check return tab is where we started that conversation, and here you can see the summary information. Again, it'll show you the current and prior and the differences for federal and any states that are included. You'll see the forms listed out just as we saw before, where we can go between all and applicable and search and expand these to enter information. One thing that may be helpful, if you're not quite sure where to enter something, you can navigate to all forms, search for the form, or just find it on the screen, and you can click on these fields to take you back to where you do data entry for a particular form. So that's one easy way to navigate and and find where you need to enter information in the program. You'll also see your fatal and your other diagnostics listed out here. These are diagnostics you can click on, and as I mentioned, you can actually make the change directly here. So you can put in a street address, and once you've made that correction, you can refresh them instead of having to go back to the input return tab to do so. If you'd like, you can view them on the input screen, so it will take you to the input return tab and the screen where this is coming from, but oftentimes it's easier just to make the correction here, move to the next diagnostic, make the correction, and when you've wrapped your diagnostics, you can refresh, and it will clear those diagnostics you've solved. As I mentioned, you'll also see overrides that have been entered into the program, so anything that's going to override calculations and take that amount will be listed here as well, and your suggestions will also be found here. And in general, some of these may be just informational that you just need, it's good to be aware of. Others may be a type of diagnostic that you can make the change to directly. So in this case, here's a suggestion about, has a taxpayer received, sold, exchanged, or disposed of a digital asset? Not something that may cause a rejection necessarily, but in this case, we would want to make that data input unless we'd entered it somewhere else in the return that they'd sold. That's why it's considered an override. Because if you've already put in that activity, we don't need to say yes or no here, but this allows for that override to say, yes, we have in fact received, sold, exchanged, or disposed a digital asset. Again, these can be a little bit more safely ignored than your other diagnostics, but you'll want to review them all as you're working through the final stages of finishing the return. File return is the final tab inside of ProConnect Tax. Here you'll see those diagnostics listed out, so I have quite a few I need to clear here. When I'm ready to file, I can simply make sure the box is checked and choose the e-file button. You'll see the different e-file options here listed, and as I mentioned, e-signature is also integrated here. You can send e-signature, it will automatically attach the 8879s or the state equivalents for any supported states, and you can also include that client copy of the tax return and send this request to the client. You can also upload additional documents if you start this request. If you just need to send the e-file authorizations, you can use a one-click request to send that to your client. You can also print information here as well. Again, as I mentioned, you can have some customizations as far as what will print, the different types of copies that you can customize, the different letters you can create and customize, as well as adding watermarks or PDFs. Every return that you print will first need to be created as a PDF, then you'll have the option to send it to Intuit link or save it somewhere else or print it as a paper copy as needed. And notice here too, you can print the e-signature documents, the documents that are generated for e-file authorization, or do partial prints. Select just the forms or just the states that you want to print to do a partial print for this client as well. Okay, our next polling question is, printing or e-filing the same tax year return multiple times will utilize multiple return credits. Take about 30 seconds to answer this question. And we'll move on in just a moment. I'm looking at some of your questions you've asked of me. Perfect. Let's wrap this up here in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Of course, the answer here was a trick one. I don't think I mentioned this to you. You can print or e-file as many times for the same client. It's not going to use more than one credit. The only time it would maybe use another credit is if you've copied the client and need to file and you try to file from the copied return, or if you change that client's social security number or EIN. But if you have one return, you're not going to use more than one credit for that one return unless you change the social or EIN for that client. Okay, some workflow utilities. I already mentioned these or showed these very briefly in the program, but you'll see flagged items, comments, and documents listed inside the program. As I mentioned, flagged items let you mark fields that maybe are missing or need more attention. They'll be highlighted orange, and you'll see a list of them inside of the program. You can view and resolve flagged items for the return, and anyone that has access to this client is going to have access to those, as well as comments. This is where you can add comments to this particular client's return. It'll sign it and timestamp it. You can favorite it or star it for emphasis, so it'll stay at the top. It's viewable by anyone at the firm with permission to view the client, and any team members can comment or add on to notes. It will not transfer year over year, but you'll be able to see this in this client's return year over year if needed. Also, something in the profile section for each client are documents. This is where you can find documents that have been shared with you via Intuit link, but you can also put firm documents that are not customer facing inside this section as well, and customize that with different folders so that you can have documents that, again, anyone with access to this client can access and view in the cloud from anywhere they need to access those documents for. Again, with organization that keeps things very nice and tidy. And finally, you may sometimes need to find some additional help in the program. You can do so by looking at the help button towards the upper right of the program. You'll find the help portal, which will let you search for various help topics and reach our customer success support via chat or phone. The assistant is an AI tool, a digital assistant that helps you direct your questions that you are having or need help towards. The Education Resource Center is where you'll find resources like this webinar and other articles and self-paced training that will help you learn the program. The community is a fantastic place, more of a forum experience, but also a place where you can find articles and troubleshooting guides and ask questions amongst your peers about how you utilize ProConnect, but also around workflows, best practices, and other tax and accounting industry questions. The Tax Pro Center is a curated location where you'll find resources, articles, and documents that are curated from tax and accounting professionals around topics and ideas relevant to the industry. And finally, the training portal and form status is where you can view videos on demand and also see the various forms availability by state and federal. This is really helpful during tax season as forms are being finalized, so you can get a direct peek into when forms will be available or approved by the various state and federal agencies. So quickly, let's take a look back inside the program. And this is where we'll be able to see some of those workflow tools. So as I mentioned, inside of the return, in the input return tab, you'll be able to see those flagged items. Any input field in the program, you can hover over it and see that flag, and you can add that as a flagged item. You'll see them all listed here. You can mark them as resolved, and you'll also have a list of all resolved items. You'll also see comments for this client as well. This is where you can add additional comments as needed. Adding more or starring them will keep them at the top. You're also able to edit, again, or add comments and format those comments as you're adding them. This is where you'll see that help button again. That's one way to get help. You're also going to be able to utilize the help here to find those various help resources that I'd mentioned. And finally, if we go back to our clients tab, our Rolodex of clients, opening a client will take you to the various options here for tax plans, documents, and IRS transcripts, which are all fantastic, but I'd mentioned documents. This is where you can save firm-facing documents, so not necessarily customer-facing, as well as all the documents your clients share with you. And you can also add your own documents here to share them with clients also. All of this located in the cloud and accessible so that you're not having to save these outside of ProConnect Tax and having them sorted again by year and by a folder system that's designed by you, customized by you. But at the same time, you can also download this information if you need to back it up or pull it outside of ProConnect quickly. Perfect. I think that's just about all that I have to share for today. And so as we move on to wrap things up, one question I will have for you is, would you like a personalized demo or consultation in regards to purchasing a solution you learned about in today's training event? Take a few moments to answer this question, and then we'll move on. I'll take a peek to see if you have any final questions. I know we didn't have a lot of time here saved at the end to do Q&A, so I've been answering questions as we've moved along. If you do have any questions, I'll stick around and answer questions. So no worries there. But if you would like to talk about ProConnect Tax in regards to purchasing, go ahead and answer yes here. We'll close this in 3, 2, and 1. If you have any questions about how to use the program more effectively, I'll show you those resources too in just a moment. And here they are. I already mentioned it. You can find all of this inside of ProConnect Tax, the Education Resource Center, the Tax Pro Center, and if you do have questions still about how to use ProConnect, maybe a specific type of data entry, don't hesitate to reach out to our support team or the community. More than happy to help. Thank you so much for being with me today. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was a compact session that we had a lot to fit into an hour. I hope it was very valuable to you. Don't forget to view the slides and utilize the other resources, especially the help resources as you're using ProConnect Tax. And remember, as you're learning the program, as you're doing data entry and actually preparing returns, what you're doing in one tax type can be applied to other tax types. So if you're feeling like, oh, this is different than what I'm used to, just know that regardless of where you're at in the return, we're not going to reinvent the wheel or change things up on you too much. And so anything you learn or solve today, again, in the 1040 tax type, you should be able to use across the program. Thank you so much for being with me today. Hope you have a fantastic rest of the day and a very successful tax season. Until next time, bye for now.